From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Justice Clarence Thomas comes under fire from the left for his relationship with a Texas billionaire as South Carolina Senator Tim Scott announces an exploratory committee for president. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, editorial board member Kate Batchelder-Odell and columnist Kim Strassel. Welcome to you both. The investigative news outlet ProPublica has made a splash with a report late last week saying that Justice Clarence Thomas has had a long-time friendship with Texas billionaire Harlan Crow and has spent time on Crow's super yacht, at his ranch, at a private resort in upstate New York, and on Crow's private jet, which the ProPublica story paints as incongruous for a public servant who has a salary of $285,000. Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu has already called on Thomas to resign for the good of the country. And here is Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on CNN last week.
Justice Thomas has been on the court for 30 years. And so to say what he is admitting in his statement in an attempt to defend himself is that he began this relationship with a billionaire and receiving these sorts of gifts after he was appointed to the Supreme Court of the United States. I think that in and of itself indicates a very, very serious problem. And then on top of that, he is now implicating his colleagues. And I do believe that Chief Justice John Roberts must now come forward and state if he allows and is allowing this kind of very serious corruption to happen on this court.
Kate, what do you make of this controversy?
Well, Kyle, I think it's important to go through what the report did and didn't say, because AOC there is throwing around the word corruption. And it's worth noting that the ProPublica report on Clarence Thomas, it was mostly innuendo about the perception of being friends with a billionaire. What the piece did not allege at all was, for instance, that this friendship with a billionaire had influenced Thomas's decisions in a case. Harlan Crow had no business before the court, as the report says. So we don't have any evidence here that this friendship with a billionaire in any way influenced Thomas's judicial thinking. In fact, Harlan Crow goes on the record in the story to say that he's not aware of any instance in which anybody that was ever around Thomas on some of these trips tried to ask him about current cases or otherwise be involved in the business before the court. So I think that the left here has other motivations in attacking Thomas. They are throwing around the word corruption, and they're also using this opportunity to lobby for ethics disclosures that are typically a tool the left uses to keep people they don't like out of public service positions and to make sure only people who are public interest lawyers or have other backgrounds that they deem acceptable sign up for public service. So I think it's important, Kyle, to walk through the details here of what the polemicists at ProPublica don't have, which is evidence of Thomas being influenced by this billionaire at any level, and talk more about what the broader motivations are in perhaps using it as a cudgel to go after Thomas on the court.
I'll read a few pieces of the statement that Harlan Crow gave to ProPublica. It says, "The hospitality we have extended to the Thomases over the years is no different from the hospitality we have extended to our many other dear friends. Justice Thomas and Ginny never asked for any of this hospitality. We have never asked about a pending or lower court case. Justice Thomas has never discussed one, and we have never sought to influence Justice Thomas on any legal or political issue." The statement goes on to say that he is unaware that anybody that he also invited, he's unaware that they talked to Justice Thomas about any cases or were seeking to lobby him. Kim, I guess I would have a couple thoughts here. One is that if you look at Justice Thomas's jurisprudence and his view of the law, it has been pretty broadly consistent over the decades that he's been on the court. So as Kate explains, I don't think there's much of a case here in this ProPublica story that Justice Thomas has been influenced by this in some fashion. I would also get on my hobby horse here and say that part of the story here may be that a lot of these public figures in Washington are wildly underpaid. I mean, you have 9 Supreme Court justices who are at the top of the judiciary in the United States making, this ProPublica story says, $285,000 a year, which especially if they're coming out of a big law firm when they get nominated to the bench. That's probably an enormous pay cut for them. And so I get that it's not a popular or populist thing to do, but maybe Congress ought to go through and raise some of these salaries for the president, the Supreme Court justices, and members of Congress themselves who have not had a raise in a very, very long time. But Kim, then we get to, at the bottom of this, it's a story about a justice who is friends with a billionaire. And if the billionaire says, hey, why don't you come hang out on my ranch this weekend? And Justice Thomas says yes, is that corruption?
Absolutely not. I mean, this is such a non-bombshell. Basically, we're talking about longtime friends here who are spending time with each other, one of them enjoying the hospitality of others. I have to assume, by the way, that hospitality is reciprocal, and at times that the Thomases have also extended courtesies to Harlan Crow and his family. It might not be at the same measure or level, but this is an aspect of friendship. And so the question you have to ask here is there anything wrong with a Supreme Court justice having friends that have a lot of money? Well, absolutely not. If so, where are you going to set that bar? And then the second question is, did he violate any ethics? No. As Kate pointed out, there is absolutely zero evidence that Crow ever had business in front of the court, that he ever asked for any information about the court. As you note, Kyle, there is no indication that Justice Thomas has ever altered his jurisprudence in a way that would look suspicious, that would suggest he had been influenced. Moreover, one of the questions here is, was he obliged to make this public and make it transparent? The reality is that the rules all along, as this was going on, was that he did not have to disclose any of this. Now, that has recently changed. The U.S. Judicial Conference recently changed the rules for more disclosure, but they only took effect last month. And Justice Thomas, in a statement, of course, said that, of course, now that there are these new rules, if anything is required to be disclosed, I will disclose it. So essentially what we have here is a story that is heavy on ridiculous adjectives, exclusive, private, opulent, lavish. But as our editorial pointed out, adjective overkill tends to be the last refuge of reporters who don't have much to report. And that seems to be the case here. This is simply part of an ongoing campaign by the left to besmirch and smear Justice Thomas because they are angry over the shift of the court, and they will do anything to try to get back power on the court.
On the point about disclosure, here is the statement from Justice Thomas. Early in my tenure at the court, I sought guidance from my colleagues and others in the judiciary and was advised that this sort of personal hospitality from close personal friends who did not have business before the court was not reportable. And then he added that the Judicial Conference is changing those guidelines, quote, and it is, of course, my intent to follow this guidance in the future, unquote. So he's saying that his view of the disclosure obligations did not cover this sort of thing in the past, but now it does. And so now he will follow the new guidelines and report this if it happens. But Kate, I guess what this boils down to then is a perception issue. But part of what makes the ProPublica story so fascinating is it is not a comparison of how judges are traveling and justices are traveling. It's really deeply focused on Justice Thomas. But I would bet that there are other justices who have been on private jets in the 2-decade period that we're talking about here. And so it's really hard to know whether Justice Thomas is actually an outlier in how he's treated these disclosure rules or whether he's similar to the other justices. We just don't know that. And I think the public would be interested to find that out. I mean, if there are other justices who have been on a jet owned by a liberal billionaire, I understand why people would be interested in that. But that is not really the story that we're getting here.
Well, Kyle, I mean, to Kim's point, there's no limiting principle here. You can't be friends with a billionaire. Could you be friends with a millionaire? There's definitely some playing on the spookiness of billionaires. But I would also note, Kyle, Elena Kagan was dean of Harvard Law School. In that position, I imagine she met some people who have earned some pretty impressive wealth. She may have had dinner with them. I think that makes us pause about this story and have to view it in a larger context of the left attacking the court and having lost control of the court through the justices that President Trump appointed, have been doing a series of things to delegitimize it. So that's why I think we are not reading stories about other justices who may also have wealthy friends. We know Clarence Thomas takes RV trips, but we are apparently just passing judgment on certain types of vacations that he takes. But I do think you do have to ground this in the larger context of what the left is doing here to try to delegitimize the court and to gain control of it, whether we've seen on the progressive left a call for court packing, a call for making justices more impeachable and easier to remove. I think you have to view this as part of that campaign to make the court look bad, and suppose of doing the harder work of kind of evaluating, well, in public service, what do people do with their spare time and who do they know and how does that influence bear on them? I don't think that's what we're seeing here. I think this is more of a partisan campaign to make the court look bad and to try to diminish public confidence in it, which I think is really dangerous, I should add. But that is really, I think, the larger picture and story.
Kim, where do you think this goes from here? I mean, the clip that we played from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she was urging Chief Justice John Roberts to investigate. I'm not sure that he has the power like that over another justice. My understanding is that the Chief Justice is the first among equals, but all 9 of them have similar life tenure and protections. On the other hand, maybe there is something that Sheldon Whitehouse or other Democrats on Capitol Hill would try to get out of a hearing on this, even if it is, as Kate says, mostly a partisan show.
I think you got to look at this 2 ways. I think from the court perspective, I agree with you. I don't see much happening here. Yes, John Roberts is first among equals in theory, but I don't see the powers to necessarily launch an investigation. Also, the court tends to be very close. We've heard lots of stories about their personal relationships. The other justices, including the more liberal justices, are probably aware that opening this up, it could open up a lot of questions, as Kate was saying, about who does what exactly in all of their private time. And I doubt that anybody wants to go there. Also, do I doubt that it would be very helpful or useful for the public debate. I think also it's very unlikely that Justice Thomas is going to do anything more than the statement he issued. One thing that I actually admire about him is that he has weathered infinite numbers of attacks from the left since the moment he was going through his confirmation hearings. He has held very strong. I think he understands that this is now part of the job and he doesn't allow it to pressure him. From Congress's perspective, yes, you're going to continue to see Sheldon Whitehouse and Dick Durbin jump up and down on their soapboxes and keep talking about the need for a new code of conduct or a recusal standard, because this is a big game here, right? Is that they are just laying the groundwork so that at some point, if they were to ever get the votes where they could break a filibuster, they could justify taking egregious action against the court and interfering in that branch of government with court packing or calls for impeachment or whatever you might put forward. But for now, they do not have the ability to break the filibuster, nor do they have the votes to pass any legislation that could enforce the regime that they would want, because Republicans understand fully what the game is here. So I expect a lot more whining and crying from the likes of AOC, but I don't expect any real action in D.C.